I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. And today we're talking about 3 steps to letting go of mistakes. And we're going to cover what to do when you start to feel really frustrated when you're sewing and how you can recover quickly so you can get back to having fun. All right, let's start with our icebreaker for today. So today's icebreaker, I'm just going to read it the way it's written. And it was written by Sally G. So thank you, Sally, for contributing this question today. So Sally says, so my icebreaker is something my friends and husbands have mentioned. She says husbands. I don't know if she's talking about multiple husbands. So my friends and husbands have mentioned a lot. I talk to myself during sewing, as in I make a dialogue like being my own teacher. Well, I'm not always aware that I'm doing this, but I do like talking out loud during my sewing. For example, I might say, okay, so now I'm going to cut out my fabric, or should I check the instructions once again before I commit? I find it helps to crystallize my thought processes. Does anyone else talk out loud to themselves in this way? So thank you for that question, Sally. I was thinking about this. I think I talk to myself when I sew, but probably not more than I do when I'm doing other things. What do you think? Mm-hmm. Do you talk to yourself a lot when you sew?
I agree. Probably no more than I normally do. And I tend to do this when I'm like kind of moving on to like the next step. Like, okay, I interfaced everything. Okay, cool. Let's stay stitch it all. So I do that. This makes me think of something that when I first started teaching sewing, there was another teacher that I knew, and she helped mentor me and like kind of teach me tricks of running a classroom and stuff. And she told me that to get in the habit of vocalizing things that feel maybe you take for granted because you've been doing them for so long and they're just very natural to you, to get in the habit of narrating everything that you're doing. And I started doing that when I was sewing at home, even like when I was like cooking or doing my makeup. It just made me get in the habit of explaining things that I was doing. And I honestly was like one of the best pieces of advice that I got when I first started out my teaching career.
That's really interesting.
So maybe, Sally, you should consider a career in teaching sewing.
Yeah, you'd probably be a great teacher, Sally. I will say, I think maybe when I'm reading things and trying to process what I'm reading, like in the instructions, I might read them out loud. Sometimes that helps just to hear them spoken out loud. So that I do. I think I talk more to the cats than I do to myself, though. I mean, they're usually in here causing a lot of problems. So talking might not be the term I would use. Lecturing, maybe. Well, thank you so much for the question, Sally. It's a good one. And I think it's a good segue into what we're talking about today. Thanks a lot for leaving that one. And if you want to share an icebreaker with us that we could use on a future episode, you can share it with us by going to seamwork.com/go/icebreakers. And if you're a Seamwork member, that's going to take you right to the thread on the community for the podcast where you can add your icebreaker that we will be checking so we can use it on a future episode. So thank you again, Sally. So talking about mistakes and how to get over them today, this is actually something I've been thinking about a lot, which is the inner voices in our head. And I think a lot of times, for a lot of us, we have this inner critic that comes out when we're doing anything hard, really, you know? And I think that's a very typical experience. And a lot of times we kind of identify with that voice. So we consider that voice in our head to be us, right? When really there are all these different voices in our head, and they might all have different messages for you. And sometimes when you're doing something hard, you tend to listen to that inner critic voice the most. So we want to talk about ways that you can kind of get away from that. Because, you know, sewing and learning how to sew is really a prime area for mistakes. Like, mistakes are going to happen. You're going to make mistakes. And so because of that, you really need to build the muscle that's going to help us learn to cope with those mistakes. And that means getting to know that inner critic and really making friends with her or him. It depends. Some people experience the inner critic as, I was reading about this recently, actually, because I wrote an issue on it for my personal newsletter about inner voices, and that some people actually don't have an inner monologue at all. Like, they don't have words in their head. And I have a cousin who is actually that way. The thoughts do not appear in her head as like words or a voice or anything like that,
Wow.
which is really interesting. And that's how it is for some people. And then for other people, it might be more visual. And for other people, they actually experience sort of a character or multiple characters in their heads. So it's really interesting because there's a lot of diversity in how most people, I think, experience more of a voice that they identify with, but there's a lot of diversity in how people experience it, which I think is really, really interesting. But I was reading about this and thinking about this because this is something that I have worked on a lot. And I tend to believe that we actually have all these voices in our head, and the inner critic voice is not necessarily a bad voice, but it is something that you have to kind of get friendly with over time. And so we're going to talk about some steps to reframe those moments when you start feeling frustrated and you start hearing that voice, that inner critic voice, and it's not making you feel good. And if you have that experience with sewing, because I think all of us do from time to time, you could try going through them the next time you hit a roadblock and see if they help. So to start us off, I just want to talk about mistakes a little bit in general. So Haley, maybe you could tell us, what was your most recent sewing mistake?
Ooh, I make so many sewing mistakes all the time, mostly because I'm careless from time to time when I sew. Oh, I know. We were filming a video the other day or yesterday for YouTube, and I was working on our Bernina we use for video, and that's not my sewing machine. I only use it really when we're filming, which is kind of like high pressure. It's like this kind of like semi-foreign machine that I only use when I'm being recorded.
Yeah, and it's kind of fancy. Like it has a lot of features.
It has a lot of features. And I'm like very like confident in like different kinds of sewing machines, which is why I made a mistake, because I was like, I know how this buttonhole feature works. And I started treating it like I did on another machine that I assumed it was very similar to, and it was not. And I was like, why is this messed up? Why do I keep making weird buttonholes? Well, if I would have like stopped and maybe like, I don't know, read the manual, I would have discovered very quickly what I was doing wrong. But yeah, I was just like, man, this machine's messed up. What's going on? Which actually is funny because that's not the place I go immediately when I make mistakes. Typically, I'm like, oh no, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm so stupid. I'm making so many mistakes. But in this, I was just like blissfully ignorant in this situation, which was kind of funny.
It's funny that you were doing a video on buttonholes too. You were struggling so much.
Yeah. A little behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's hard when your machine doesn't participate with you, because I feel like that's the most frustrating. I get so frustrated with technology of any kind when it doesn't do what I want it to do.
Yeah, it just like is different from my buttonhole feature. And there's like a few different ways that a buttonhole can work on a machine. And I was kind of assuming that it was one type, and I should never assume. This is how I used to sell sewing machines, is by showing people their fancy buttonholes. I sold a sewing machine to Giovanni Ribisi once because I showed him the very fancy automatic buttonhole that this machine had. He was buying it for his daughter.
That's cool.
Yeah, related to buttonholes. But yeah. What about you? What was your most recent sewing mistake?
You know, actually, the thing that came to mind wasn't a sewing mistake. It was a knitting mistake. I can veer from sewing mistakes because I think it's very similar. I'm working on this sweater that I've been working on for a really long time. And I'm kind of towards the end, and I was working on the sleeves, and I had put the sweater down for a little while. Like I hadn't knitted on it for, a week or two. So I picked it up again, and it had been kind of stuffed. I keep it inside this tote bag that it was stuffed inside of. And I opened it up. It's knit in the round, if you're familiar with knitting. And I started knitting on it. I knitted like 10 rows. I had gone quite a ways. And I looked at it and I was like, this doesn't look right. Why does this look weird? And then I realized that I had accidentally turned the sweater inside out before I had started knitting on it again. So I was knitting the wrong side on the outside.
So you were purling
of the sweater. Yeah. It was like a special rib pattern.
Okay.
So it had a right side and a wrong side to it. And I had to rip back like everything, like probably an hour's worth of knitting, which is not that big a deal in knitting. That happens all the time, but it was definitely frustrating, especially because I really wanted to finish the sweater soon. I don't know. It was a mistake that was, I guess, a little bit carelessness, but also just, just the kind of thing that happens, it just happens, and you might not notice it at first, and then you do. And I think that's one of the things with knitting is that you learn that mistakes are going to happen and that it might take a really long time to fix it, but it's just kind of part of the process.
Yeah.
Even more so than with sewing, I think, because everything takes so long with knitting. That was annoying, though.
Annoying, but highly relatable.
Yeah.
Is there a mistake that you've repeated frequently, or do you think that you tend to learn from your mistakes quickly?
Mostly, I would say that I tend to learn from my mistakes. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I repeat frequently. I would say the only one might be cutting the corner of making a muslin sometimes. Because sometimes you need one, sometimes you don't need one. And you have to kind of make that determination. I'm making that determination right now with a pair of pants that I want to make the Chelsea jeans, but because they're a stretch fabric, I'm kind of wondering, do I make a muslin? Because the fabric has to have the same properties. Otherwise, it's not going to tell me the true fit. So I'm trying to figure that out. And I feel like that's an area where I tend to falter sometimes and make the same mistake over and over again. But it's not so much because I'm not learning, but it's a hard determination to make sometimes.
Yeah, that's so true.
What about you?
Well, first I want to say that with the Chelsea jeans, you should just make the muslin, because even if it's not exactly the same stretch, I think you'll still be able to learn enough. And it'll tell you things about the rise and the y-axis. So
I was thinking about making a wearable muslin, maybe.
Yeah. I'm team when in doubt, make one.
Yeah. Especially for pants. I feel like
pants.
It makes sense.
It's almost sacrilege not to make a muslin, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
Unless you're making something maybe like elastic waist or something.
Yeah.
And then I'll do like a little like tissue fit on it. Let's see. I would say that I tend to learn from my mistakes pretty quickly. I have like a really good memory, and my inner critic has a even better memory than I do. So she refuses to let me forget anything. I think that really the only mistakes that I make like frequently are like little like technical mistakes, like things that I just always hate doing. Bar tacks. I always hate sewing bar tacks because I feel like they're just like they always turn out like a little bit different. Doesn't matter if you test it. Like they just always turn out, at least on my machine, just a little different every time. So that's a mistake I make. And I probably should like dedicate some time next time to like really just like sit down and spend an hour with some bar tacks and like figure it out. But I'm always like, I hate this step. Let's just get it over with. What is your first reaction when you make a mistake?
Oh, yelling and cursing. Definitely.
Me too. Me too. Instant, like maybe an F-bomb, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah. Yeah. You always have that reaction at first, I think. At least I do. I get angry at first. I mean, it's frustrating. You're spending all this time making something and then it might not even ruin it. It might just take like 5 minutes to fix, but it's frustrating every time.
Well, it like breaks your flow.
Yeah.
And I find that even if it's a easily fixable mistake, I'm like so inconvenienced by the fact that I was just like vibing with my project. And then this mistake pops up and I'm like, dang it, now I got to deal with this.
Yeah, that's definitely my first reaction is, I don't get super angry. I'm not like throwing things across the room. Usually. I can't say I haven't thrown anything across the room. Well, let's get into the tips, because I think there is a process that you can follow, and it's not like a hard and fast process, but it's something that you can keep in your mind for when you do hit these roadblocks, and it might help you out just to kind of process it and get through it and move past it. So the first thing, so we've got 3 steps today. And the first step is to just, start with how you're feeling. So you can be mad or sad or disappointed, but then move on. So don't dwell on your mistakes. And I think this is easier said than done. I don't know, for some reason, it feels good to, especially if it's anger, especially if the feeling that comes up for you, like it is for me, is anger. It kind of feels good to get angry about something.
Mm-hmm.
The first step is really, I think, key. And the first part of that is just acknowledging that you're upset. And I was just telling you, Haley, before we started recording, that I was reading this article by a therapist that was talking about labeling your feelings and just using words that like a 6-year-old would use to label your feelings, because adults tend to try to over-intellectualize what they're feeling and say, oh, I'm disappointed or I'm frustrated, instead of just saying I'm mad or I'm sad, which I thought was really interesting and kind of a cool approach to thinking about how you're talking to yourself about your feelings. And we've talked about several times on the podcast, that kind of inner child, and just listening to that voice can be really good. So acknowledge that you're upset, acknowledge that you're mad or that you're sad, however you're feeling at that moment. And then it's time to move through it. So maybe set a timer to help you kind of like give yourself a limit on how long you're just going to sit around feeling angry or sad about it. You could put it in kind of a timeout pile or a naughty pile if you want to, if you need to kind of help you, just kind of like give yourself that time away from it.
Yeah, a little space.
Yeah. Sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes you need some physical space away from it. I know when I get really frustrated with something I'm doing, whether it's a sewing project or a knitting project or whatever, I just need to put it away for a while and come back to it so I'm not feeling quite so emotional. You could take a break and, eat. You can hydrate, stretch, whatever you need to do to start making yourself physically feel better. That can be a really helpful thing to do. And then by the time you're back at your machine, you'll just be more calm and able to concentrate. So really the key here is letting yourself have whatever bad feelings you're having, but then giving yourself the space to move beyond those bad feelings, taking a break and really letting yourself just relax for a little while.
Yeah, I think the key is that if you try to move forward and problem solve when you're in this like upset state of mind, the solutions aren't going to come as easily to you, and the chances that you're going to make an additional mistake are so much higher.
Oh, yeah. So much higher. I can't tell you how many times that's happened to me.
Yeah, totally.
Just trying to, especially if it's late at night or you're tired or you're hungry.
Yeah, and you have like a self-imposed deadline. You're like, I really thought I was going to finish this tonight. Yeah. And now I have to finish this tonight.
Yeah. I get that way sometimes because I've made such a mess in my sewing room and I don't want to have to clean it all up just to make another mess again the next day or whenever I'm going to get back to it. I just want to finish so that I can put everything away. And that is, I don't know, that's pretty silly. Like to force yourself into a state of stress because you don't want to clean up more than once.
Yeah.
But, we all go through those things. I think we all kind of have those weird little quirks that cause us to put more stress on ourselves than we need to. So that was the first step. The second step is to recognize the creative potential within the mistake. So this is about really problem solving and making it work. So once you've taken that break, you've stepped away from it for a while, now it's time to come back to it. And you can kind of turn it into your own little Project Runway challenge. So just imagine that Tim Gunn is at your desk, he's at your sewing table, and he's telling you, what does he say? It's make it work time, right?
Yeah, make it work, designers.
So, sometimes that's what you have to do. And depending on what the problem is, the creative solution could be different. So it could just be a matter of seam ripping. You might just need to rip back whatever problem that you have. But it also might be an opportunity to go back to the drawing board and maybe a dress can become a skirt or a top. Maybe you can color block something. Maybe you can add an embellishment or change things up a little bit. There's a lot of different creative ways to solve a mistake other than just straight up fixing it. So I think it's interesting to, start with that mindset of, is this a creative challenge and not just, this is a problem? I don't know. I think that's cool. So that's the second step. And then the third step is to find what the lesson is and then how you're going to apply it next time. And I think that's key, is figuring out how you're actually going to use it. So If the fit was bad, for example, maybe like me, you should have made a muslin for this. I'm glad we're doing this little like pre-mortem on my sewing project
Me too.
Because now I'm not going to make this mistake. Did the fabric misbehave? Maybe if that was the problem, maybe the lesson you learned is that you should sew on some test swatches or try a fabric stabilizer or some other method that's going to help make the fabric easier to work with. Did you have a problem with the construction? Maybe the next time you need to read the instructions before you start to sew. Maybe that's the lesson that you took away from it. Did you try a new technique? Maybe you need to do a practice run first if that was the case. Or maybe you just didn't have the right tool for the job. Whatever it is, there's always a lesson that you can learn from any mistake that you've made. And so identifying what that lesson is and then figuring out how you're going to actually make use of that lesson the next time you sew something or the next time you sew something similar will really help to kind of cement it in your mind so that what you take away from the experience is not just frustration or not just a failed project if you can't recover it, but something that you can actually use to help you grow in your sewing practice and learn some new skills. So those are the 3 steps for getting past your mistakes. Pretty simple.
Yeah. So just to recap, the 3 steps are feel your feelings, allow yourself to sit with those feelings, maybe take a break, put the project in timeout, and then come back to it when you're feeling in a better state of mind over the whole fiasco. The next step is to recognize the creative potential in the mistake. It's time to put on your problem-solving cap. Maybe it's as simple as seam ripping. Maybe it's an opportunity to add an extra detail or get creative with it. And then step 3 is to find the lesson and apply it for next time so that you're just continuously learning and even finding a silver lining in your worst mistakes. Because trust me, we all have them. Sari, what's your big takeaway from this?
Oh, I think mine is obvious. I need to make a muslin for those Chelsea jeans. I think it's really helpful to think about what are the mistakes that do come up for you over and over again. And that, like I said, that's one for me, so that you can kind of figure out where that's coming from. Like for me, maybe it's that I'm in a rush or, I'm so excited about the project. I want to have the finished thing done and I don't want it to take a couple weeks for me to do it. So if that's this kind of thing that keeps leading to mistakes, sort of looking at the why behind it can be really, really helpful. And for me, rushing in my life is probably the number one cause of stress generally. So that's a good lesson. It's a sewing lesson and life lesson for me. What about you?
Oh, that's a really good one. I think I might have to piggyback off of that really, when I reflect on it, the root of a lot of my sewing snafus is not taking my time with things. And that shows up in kind of various different ways. It can be like me assuming I know how to do something when I do not. It can be me not wanting to slow down and make a nice bar tack because I don't want to.
That does sound like your inner child. I don't want to.
I don't want to. The bar tacks I make are by no means horrible. I just know they could be better.
Sure, you're the only one who notices.
Yeah, no, that's totally the case. And so maybe that's another takeaway is my inner critic even right? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
I find she's right about 5% of the time.
Okay.
The rest, it's just exaggeration.
I will keep a tally and report back. Well, if you are looking to, you're stuck on a project, you maybe need to practice a new technique and you want a little bit of guidance, I think that you should definitely go check out our YouTube channel. On YouTube, we have a new free sewing video every single week, and we have a huge library of over 200 videos. We've been making videos on YouTube for quite a while now. So there's a lot of really great gems you can find there. So if you're stuck on something, maybe go check it out and we might have a video to help you. You can find us at youtube.com/c/Seamwork Video or search Seamwork Video on YouTube and you will see Sari's face and my face there. And I think that you would love it if you subscribed.
Yeah, you will definitely like it. If you like the podcast, you will enjoy our YouTube channel. We're doing a lot of cool stuff on there right now. We're doing a lot of like project diaries and also a lot of tutorials. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, you could go watch a project diary and watch Sari mess up in real time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to film one next week and I'm sure I will mess something up.
Yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I can't promise you'll see me curse or throw anything because I might save that for off camera. But
I want a refund. Well, if you liked this episode, we would just love if you left us a review. Reviews help other people to find our podcast so that more people who love sewing, just like we do, can find us and listen to us. You can leave us a review. You can leave us some stars. You can tell a friend about us. We would just appreciate and love any of the above. Today, we have a review from Tete Danmar. And they write, love the content and the way it is presented. Always learn something, and I enjoy the lovely hosts and their respectful dialogue with each other.
I love that. We're respectful.
I like that too.
That's
I
nice.
like to think so, but I'm glad that comes across.
I wonder if this person listens to a lot of disrespectful podcasts.
Yeah.
Where people are just dissing each other, the two hosts.
That would be a really interesting, just like spin-off episode of just like Seamwork
We
diss
roast
track.
each other.
So stay tuned for that.
No, that is a really nice compliment, though.
Yes, thank you so much for leaving that. And I like really mean it when I say it, that they just mean so much to us and we love reading them.
Mm-hmm.
So keep them coming. You can also follow us on YouTube, like we mentioned before, at Seamwork Video. Follow along with us on Instagram and get updates on what's going on. You can find us at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork and become part of our private community, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, podcast listeners get 50% off. That's a lifetime discount. So as long as you maintain that membership, you get that discount when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. That is seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And we will also link that in the show notes.
All right. Well, that does it for us this week. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.